Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Very glad to have you with us today. And as we've mentioned for the past couple of episodes, this is a very special edition of the Three Martini Lunch. For just the fourth time in our history, we have a guest. And we should also say I'm very impressed that Jim Garrity made it in studio today because we actually had flurries here in the D.C. area that did cancel school, which is depressing, but not a surprise. But the wait is over. There's been a lot of guessing about who our special guest is today, and we are thrilled to welcome to the Three Martini Lunch Dana Perino, former White House press secretary for President George W. Bush, now co-host of The Five and co-host of America's Newsroom, and an avid listener, we're honored to say, the Three Martini Lunch. So Dana, great to have you with us.
Thank you. It's a real honor because I do listen every day. I've listened for years. And the podcast for me, when I listen to it sort of mid-afternoon, it's a great prep for me for The Five. So I appreciate being on. I know you don't have guests very often. I will try to not ruin the experience for other future guests.
There's no way you could do that. We are very selective about our guests. We only get really big names. And also, we're kind of lazy, and we just don't put a lot of effort into it. So thank you for appearing here. We just want to pick your brain on a couple of topics on the political scene and kind of the state of government. And I kind of want to start. You're well known for your work on Fox News, but I think probably best remembered as White House press secretary. I think a very challenging job.
Hardest hit, Bill Hemmer. Wow.
Give all my love to Bill. So one of the questions I've been thinking about, you listen to the podcast, very often our bad or crazy martinis come from the comments from current White House press secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, and quite often from her predecessor Jen Psaki. And so as an outsider, it looks to, and I know I'm not the target audience, but it seems to me like Karine Jean-Pierre is not doing a great job of communicating this, and that every day there's some gaffe or there's some bad messaging, or she can't answer questions that really should be answerable. But I haven't done that job. Yeah. So Dana, having been behind the podium and had all those questions, when you see Karine Jean-Pierre or for that matter Jen Psaki, what do you see? Is it a harder job than we give her credit for? Is it what do you think of the Biden White House's communication efforts?
Thank you. It's one of my favorite topics. I loved being the White House press secretary. I loved actually being the deputy White House press secretary. That was a great job because you could help get everybody ready for the press briefing. You could have interactions with the reporters from the briefing room, of whom I was very friendly with most of them. You didn't have to be out front, right? Risking gaffes, for example. I was deputy to Scott McClellan and then to Tony Snow. I loved the job, and I highly recommend for any position, always take the deputy role because it gives you a chance to learn the job. If you have to travel on weekends and holidays, that's when I filled in as the press secretary, weekends and holidays, and we would all troop into the Oval Office if we were leaving, for Air Force One through the South Lawn to go to Marine One. We'd come in and say, "Hello, sir, it's the B team." And he'd say, "That's the best team." And we would have so much fun. And that's how we really got to know each other. And including actually one of my favorite memories was being on Marine One. It was my first solo trip. We were going to the Boy Scout Jamboree. And this was in 2005. And that year, the Boy Scout Jamboree at that time was held in Virginia, and there had been some terrible thunderstorms over 3 days, including lightning strikes, and 2 scouts had passed away. They'd been killed by these lightning strikes. And so that had canceled the president's trip 2 days in a row. On the third day, the president said, "I am going to this Jamboree." And the Secret Service said, "It might not be safe." And he said, "Oh, it will be safe. Make it so. I have to get there. I have to talk to these scouts." So I was assigned to go. I was so nervous. I was like, where do you sit? I don't want to irritate him. I didn't know the president that well at the time. So Scott McClellan, I remember on the back of a piece of paper, drew me a map of the inside of Marine One and showed me where to sit. So I was so prepared. What I wasn't prepared for was that on the way back, during this beautiful long sunset in the June of that year, the president had a packed dinner that the White House mess had made for him. And it was peanut butter and honey sandwiches, apple slices, and sun chips. And he started to eat his dinner, and he handed me a half a sandwich. And I said, "Oh, no, sir, I'm fine. Thank you." He said, "Come on." And I said, No, thank you. I didn't want to eat the president's dinner." And he said, "You will eat it, and you will enjoy it." And I said, "Yeah, you're right. I love peanut butter and honey." And it was just a sweet memory for me, and that had nothing to do with policy or anything, right? But having a good relationship with the president is something that happens over a period of time. So that gets me to this current White House. I actually knew Jen Psaki a little bit. She was on the communications team for Obama. And so we were very friendly because remember, President Bush 43 told all of us we had better have the most professional transition ever from one White House to the next. So we were very accommodating, very friendly, and we stayed friendly throughout her time at the State Department. I think Jen Psaki really benefited from having been the State Department press secretary because those were some tough years. They have very tough reporters over there. And by the time then she becomes White House press secretary under Biden, she has all of that experience. You cannot discount that. That was incredible for her. To me, from the outside, and I don't have a close relationship with Karine Jean-Pierre, from my perspective, one, I think that COVID meant that they did not have good personal relationships with Joe Biden. Karine Jean-Pierre did not work for him in the Senate. There's a lot of history there. Obviously, we've established how old he is. He's been in office for a long time. And so there's not any sharing of peanut butter sandwiches during COVID, right? They remember how closed off President Biden was? Then she takes over for the job, and she's got a tough situation, right? Afghanistan has happened. The economy's terrible. Their approval ratings are down, and they're not getting any better. Every other day, there's another story about how Kamala Harris's staff is leaving. They're just in a situation where they have bad facts. And often what we from the outside will say, wow, they have a terrible communications problem. I'm very sympathetic to say it's not a comms problem. Communications problems are based on fact problems, and those problems come from the very top. I think she also benefits and is also harmed by the presence of Admiral Kirby, who is a very, very good communications person. He has a ton of experience, that military stature, a lot of gravitas, I would say. He has a mild manner way about him. He's not condescending. He seems to get along well with people. But in any organization, but especially at the White House, you have to have clear lanes of responsibility. And if you don't, that can be a real problem. Now, 85% of the questions I got at the White House briefing were foreign policy related until the surge had sort of taken hold. And then it switched to what? The financial crisis. But I didn't call in somebody else to come and brief on the financial crisis. I had to learn the material myself. But this is Biden's decision and the chief of staff's decision. So in a way, I think that Karine is in between a rock and a hard place.
Dana, one of the things that we've noticed, though, and we've joked about, of course, is when Jen Psaki was there, if she either couldn't answer or didn't want to answer, she would circle back to you. Karine Jean-Pierre just says, I don't have anything for you today. If it's not in the binder, there's usually not any sort of extemporaneous discussion. And so how did you handle that situation? What's the right way to handle that situation? And are you obligated to follow up with people as often as you can, or do you just kind of ignore the gotcha questions?
No, I think that those are some great questions. Like I always did, because here's the thing. When I went there, I would think of myself as 50% of my responsibility to advocate and defend the President of the United States, the Bush administration, the government of the United States. And I never thought of myself as the Republican press secretary. There was a Republican press secretary at the RNC. His name is Sean Spicer. You can call him for all of that information. I also was very well aware of things that the president would always remind me of, which is that every president or press secretary is always speaking to several audiences at once. You are speaking not just to the press corps, but to the American citizens, to our allies, our troops, and our enemies. I also would spend the other 50% of my time advocating and defending the rights of the press corps to have access to its government, because that's how our system is. That's how it should be. And I took a lot of that in terms of tradition. I like tradition. I'm conservative. I try to do that. So I would respect the fact that all of those reporters, of which I had been one for a brief period of time, they had a job to do. And their editor was going to demand that there be something in their inbox by the deadline. And if there wasn't, there was going to be a problem. So I would say, let's help them as much as possible. In addition to that, let's just say, I'll give you an example. There was a Reuters reporter who came to me one morning. One of their people in the Middle East had seen something in the waterways there in one of the straits. And it was a ship, one of ours. And he came to me and said, hey, we have this story. We think there's this, one of our ships is there. And can you confirm? And I said, I personally don't have any information, but let me get back to you. I went to the National Security Advisor. Steve Hadley said, let's get back to them. I said, okay. So I called the reporter back. I said, look, I checked into it. I can't say anything to you now, but I promise you this. As soon as I can, you will be the first person I call. And so I had pretty good relationships with that. And what I hear from our folks there at the White House is that they have a pretty good relationship also with the press office at the White House in terms of logistics and for things like that. What they don't have, and it's very obvious, is access to the president. At the press conference last week where President Biden tried to put the cat back in the bag after the Robert Hur report, did you see how the pent-up frustration from these reporters was? And it was not time for them to joke around. And this is the biggest story of their careers. And I just don't understand why the White House put him in that position. But again, I don't necessarily fault the staff. If the president of the United States has instincts that are this poor in terms of communicating to the American people, that's on him.
So, Dana, one of the things we've heard, I don't know if this is established fact yet, but that it was Biden himself that wanted to do that, even though it was probably not the best idea given the hour of the day and the anger that he had at that moment about what was in the report. So when it's your job to make the boss look as good as possible and the boss insists on doing something you think is probably going to harm him, how do you deal with that?
43 and I had a really good relationship, and he had good instincts. And I also was surrounded. It wasn't just me making these decisions. Ed Gillespie was amazing. Dan Bartlett. I had an incredible deputy team, and I still talk to all these people all the time. Karl Rove was there, et cetera. But the president had very good instincts on this type of thing. I think that what I might have done if I had been in the press office is to say, sir, I know that you want to get on camera tonight, and I agree with that decision. We are going to make that happen. In order for it to be as successful as possible for you, here's what I recommend. Let's do a straight-to-camera statement. You and the teleprompter, no questions, and tomorrow morning we will pick it up with a press conference in the White House briefing room at 11 a.m. when you are fresh and we have a chance to get you ready to have the most successful experience possible. Cool? Cool. But I don't know what it's like to go to Biden and say, that's a bad idea, sir. Maybe he bites your head off. Apparently, he's angry a lot.
He'll call you Jack. We know that, that if he's not happy with what you said. And of course, like we said, it's your job to make the boss look good. I remember when George W. Bush, who, of course, very much had all of his marbles, but when it came to speaking, sometimes he had some issues. He was given a speech, I think it was at the Legion Convention or VFW, and somebody put the word totalitarianism in the speech. And, well, it didn't quite go exactly as planned.
I don't remember what he said. I know that there was that one time when he used the word misunderestimated, which I have to tell you, I actually think that should be a word because it's a pretty good one.
Yes. Sometimes he just invents words that ought to be there. Yes.
I mean, Webster's adds 5 ridiculous words every year. Misunderestimated actually means something.
Yeah, and just kind of overall, I'm kind of struck by this White House. Well, we'll put them on TikTok. That'll fix the problem.
Yeah.
Or,
I'll tell you what drives me the most crazy, and I actually find this professionally insulting from my current job as well, which is they think that President Biden taking a few questions from the press outside of the White House when he's on his way to Marine One, as the helicopter is up and running, and you can't hear President Biden, and you can't hear the reporters, and we have to use closed captions to let the American people know what he says. To me, it looks terrible for Biden. It's not good for the reporters. It's not good for the American people and all those audiences I mentioned. And there's a really good way that they could change this. Biden is a little bit soft-spoken, so it makes him look older when you can't hear him. Why not set up the press pool in the diplomatic reception room, that's the room right in the middle that he goes in and out of when he's going to Marine One. We used to do that. You have a statement in the diplomatic reception room on your way out. It would make perfect sense to me that they would make Biden look and sound better, but they decide not to do it. And again, maybe this is what he wants to do because he saw Trump do it and he thinks that's the way to do it. And then they count that as press interaction and interviews. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, non-traditional ways of communicating is the buzzword of the day.
Terse answers, yeah.
More with Dana in just a second, but of course we need to tell you today that we're sponsored in part by Bio-Optimizers. And look, if you think press secretaries don't get a lot of sleep, and they don't. There's a lot of us that don't get a lot of sleep, and we don't have nearly as good of reasons. But getting sleep is really important. And right now, BioOptimizers has a fantastic 14-day sleep challenge for you by going to biooptimizers.com/martini-free.
Not only does Magnesium Breakthrough help you sleep better, it helps calm your mind and allows you to feel grounded and relaxed during the day, and especially right before bed. Remember, most magnesium supplements are proven to be ineffective because they only contain 1 or 2 forms of magnesium. Magnesium Breakthrough contains all 7 key forms of magnesium to help you have a relaxed response to stressful situations.
So to get your free 14-day supply of Magnesium Breakthrough, again, visit biooptimizers.com/martini-free. This offer is only available at biooptimizers.com/martini-free. That's martini-free, all one word. Overcome the struggle and get the most relaxing sleep ever with Magnesium Breakthrough. Just pay shipping. Go to biooptimizers.com/martini-free. biooptimizers.com/martini-free. On to our second martini now. And Dana, of course, your role ever since the Bush administration, or for most of that time now, has been with Fox News in a variety of roles. As we mentioned at the top, you're a longtime co-host of The Five, and now with Bill Hemmer on America's Newsroom. And so when it comes to the campaign, this is also a non-traditional campaign. So, Jim, where do you want to start the questioning here?
Yeah, well, I noticed it said very recently, quote, "I feel like last week was the death knell of the Biden campaign." I can't say I completely disagree, but also that just feels like a very, sweeping statement. And then just kind of a similar question, and I hear from colleagues that everywhere I work, there are a lot of Americans who are frustrated with Trump. There are a lot of Americans who are frustrated with Biden, and there are a lot of Americans who just are facing, we'll see what no labels does, but they just face the 2024 election with dread. And yet, the election is still really important. And even if you don't like both those candidates, the consequences of this election are going to be serious and consequential for a long time. How do we keep people interested? How do we keep people from tuning out? How do we, I understand that not wanting to listen to these two guys, but it all still matters. So your thoughts on that? And did last week wrap up the election? Is Biden now unelectable? Or, how do you see things shaking out from here?
In Nevada at the caucus, Nikki Haley lost to none of the above. Sorry, in the primary, Nikki Haley lost to none of the above, right? By a large amount.
Yeah.
And I said, wow, Americans across the country are saying none of the above is an option? Please tell us more. How do we get that? We haven't had an election like this since 1892, where you had a president who had lost and then wanted to run again happen. You have never had candidates this old. You've never had candidates with 100% name ID on both sides. So this is definitely different. I think people are interested because they're very worried about the state of the country. And you could say that from the far left and the far right. And everyone in between is really wanting to deal with some of the big problems that we're facing. Number one, inflation in the economy, and now the border and all the problems that come from that, plus all the other things that we need to worry about, like foreign policy threats. When I said I thought that the Robert Hur report was the death knell for the Biden campaign, they just might not know it yet. I did choose my words carefully. I am cautious in what I say. I don't just throw around things if I don't mean it. And I do mean that. I don't know if they realize. However, I have a feeling that they do. Because what Robert Hur said was what everybody was thinking, what they see every day, what the American people believe to be true. And now the press, which was turning a blind eye to all of these problems, now has full and complete permission to say exactly what's happening. And there's a story in the New York Post today, can Joe Biden go forward, et cetera. You're going to see a lot of these going forward. And I would imagine you're going to see some new flattering profiles of Kamala Harris. How do we keep people interested? Well, one, I think that Trump is going to keep it interesting. There's no question about that. That's always entertaining and interesting, and it might also just be infuriating for some. The issues also might be the ones that we have to pay a lot of attention to. I always like to point out that in the year 2000, neither George W. Bush or Al Gore were ever asked a question about al-Qaeda. Okay, so you never know what is actually coming. You also have a situation where there's razor-thin margins in both the Senate and the House. Those things are really interesting to see. But it could be that for the first time in our lifetime, we cover a crazy convention on the Democratic side. Now, when I say that I thought the Hur report was the death knell for the Biden campaign, It doesn't mean that they're not going to stick with him. They might. But to me, that was basically, I don't want to say that he's definitely going to lose, but I mean, it does not look good for them right now. And I don't see how he gets better. As my friend Colin Reed always says, Father Time is undefeated and time only goes in one direction. So how is he all of a sudden going to get better? And 86% of Americans are going to change their minds that he's actually not too old to run for president?
Yeah, I was going to say that the reaction since that, the Hur report and the Thursday night press conference certainly indicates that Democrats feel like this was a hit below the waterline, that this was something that, will be very difficult to bounce back from.
Well, and now they're in the position of trying to celebrate the conclusion of the report while also demonizing the reasoning for the report. So that's
I wondered, would they have preferred that Biden get charged and be indicted?
Yeah, that's the other option,
right? That was the other option.
Yeah. Look at me, America. I'm competent to stand trial.
Dana, so in the early part of the day with Bill Hemmer, you're mainly doing news, and in the evening, you're doing commentary. And so how difficult is it to balance those hats, and how did your time as press secretary help you for that?
Oh, great question. I actually struggled at first because I wasn't sure if I could do either role well. And a former colleague of ours said, why don't you just trust yourself? Oh, that's an interesting concept. And actually, now what I realize is that everything I do in the morning helps me prepare for what I'm going to do in the afternoon. And I really have the best of both worlds here at Fox. I get to do the news in the morning and talk about the news in the afternoon. And in a way, I do think that's also how Americans are consuming news. When we were kids, when you got home at 5 or 6, that was when you learned what happened during the day. Now, by 5 or 6, you already know what happened. You want to know what people you trust think about what happened. So I feel well positioned. And the great thing also about being here is that they always find a little bit something for me to do where I'm not bored. Or I come up with an idea like my podcast, Perino on Politics, that Jim Garrity's been a part of, and I appreciate that so much. It's just something I wanted to do it because I was doing these calls with my friends anyway, just calling them on a Monday and saying, what's up? What's happening? What do you think? Oh my gosh, could you believe that? What am I missing? And I realized, I could actually just do this as a podcast and provide this. And Fox News is like, sure, let's do it. So for the first time in a long time in my career, I'm really not worried about what's next. And that feels great.
I think Jim and I are in unanimous agreement here. I realize this isn't the highest bar to clear, but we think you've made the jump more successfully and objectively than George Stephanopoulos. So congratulations.
Yeah, different kettle of fish, indeed.
Indeed. All right, let's move to our final martini now with Dana Perino, former White House press secretary and co-host of America's Newsroom, co-host of The Five. And Dana, one of the things you got to do, I believe for the first time in this presidential campaign cycle, was to co-moderate a debate, one of the early debates in the Republican cycle this year. Obviously, President Trump decided not to take part. Jim, I know you and I both watched these debates very carefully. You wrote about them a lot. How did you want to kick off the questioning here?
Well, I guess my first thought is so you've been through it. What, if anything, surprised you? Was anything about it frustrating that turned out particularly well? Having never done that before, how did you come out of that debate as a moderator and say, oh, wow, I can't believe that X happened? And maybe it was just Vivek rambling or something.
It was my first time ever being a moderator. I was surprised by the request and thrilled by it, but it was also one of those things where, you remember I said I liked being the deputy press secretary? I liked being the deputy moderator, which is when it was somebody else. I could just send them my ideas for questions. And when you are actually doing the moderating, wow, I loved the experience, even all like the bad things. I only teared up once. Out of frustration, because you take this broad canvas and you can paint anything on it and think of all the possible questions you would just love to ask, and you have to hone it down and hone it down and hone it down. And you've got two other co-moderators. I loved everything about it. I could not have been more supported by Fox News in every aspect. It was terrific. I will say this though, I think that model is broken because we had 7 candidates up there. And at that time, they agreed on 93% of the issues. So you're trying to find moments where they would have disagreement. At that point, they're just disagreeing about their personalities. So the personal attacks were there. There was also the second debate. They were all trying to land some blows so that they could keep their campaign going. I remember Governor Burgum anytime any of us asked a question, he immediately raised his hand to interrupt. And he's really tall. And it was like the only thing I could see out of the corner of my eye. I'm like, we're going to get to you. And behind me, his staff was saying, Burgum, Burgum, Burgum. I was like, oh my gosh, you guys. And I just don't know if it is the best way to do a primary debate. I'm not sure and look, the producers are probably going to say, are you crazy? But I'm not sure as a live studio audience is the best idea. I'm not sure that standing is the best idea. If you want to have a longer, thoughtful discussion, you think about this. Joe Rogan, for example, he'll have a podcast for 3.5 hours with one guest, and they will cover so many different topics, so many different areas. And people are listening to that. I don't think people want 45-second answers on whether we should reform Social Security. And they just became sort of gotcha moments. I'm not saying I have a better model. I don't. But I think that both our primary system, in terms of first states, I think that's ripe for changing. I would like to see a rolling regional primary. I think that would be exciting and different and more representative of America. And I'm not exactly sure what to do on these primary debates, but I don't think it was the most effective way to get information to Republican voters when they're making decisions.
I was going to say, first of all, as someone who got stuck in the Iowa snow, yes, we should change the primary state order. And then just secondly, I think you put your finger on something that was bugging me about these early debates, that like you'd have 7 candidates on stage. And you could either ask the exact same question as all 7 and get 7 versions of I'm the one who's going to secure the border. Or you could ask, I think what was it, your debate, like 3 or 4 would get a question. Mm-hmm. And then someone like Mike Pence would say, well, before I answer about the economy, I want to go back to what you guys were saying about the border. And so that 60-second answer or whatever they had to be chopped into 2 30-second answers. Well, unsurprisingly, that's not all that illuminating. Whatever problems were there seemed to be built into the structure of it. And I don't know whether, and I think that as you saw the field get smaller, you had more exchanges of ideas, and it was, so I think you did the best you could with the structure you had. But yeah, that there was something about that. At some point, just there are too many people on stage.
Yes, and I really am humble enough to say I do not know the answer. There could be some creativity for the next time. For maybe the campaigns get together and say, hey, what if we do this? Like, force people to have a conversation. To see what might work better. But that said, I really, really loved the experience. And I think it was right after that debate, 2 more people dropped out. So, it did its job of winnowing the field.
You were the Grim Reaper that we needed, thinning the herd.
I will have to give credit to Doug Burgum for one thing. Obviously, the campaign didn't go too far. But the guy, what did he tear his Achilles or blow out his ACL the day before the first debate, and he still stood up there the whole time? So
he's a great guy and a wonderful governor. And I hope that if Republicans win in the future, that he would be somebody that willing to serve at a federal level, a really terrific guy. And a friend of mine, one of those deputies I mentioned from the White House, worked with him at Microsoft. And as soon as Burgum announced his candidacy, I didn't know who he was. I got a note from him saying, I'd vote for that guy in a second for president. He's great. So hopefully a bright future ahead for him.
I think the fact that you didn't know who he was, like we didn't know who he was probably one of the bigger problems in the Burgum campaign. Did you wheel around during a commercial break to his staffers and go, every time you say that, it's another 5 minutes before he gets a question?
No, I didn't, but I thought it.
Talk a little bit more about the prep. Like, obviously, you have multiple people asking questions, so you need to have organization about what the topics are. And again, you're whittling the question down to a way that, A, makes the audience and the candidates clear that you understand the Republican position on this issue, which a lot of the other mainstream networks don't. But at the same time, you're trying to create differences between candidates on stage. So
I remember one thing I really wanted to ask about was about how so many people said they weren't sleeping well at night because of worries, right? That worries about, making ends meet, paying their bills. Childcare is such a huge problem in this country. And at the end of that particular week, the funding for childcare that was put forward during COVID times was ending. And this has had a profound effect. I encourage National Review to take more of a look at this since I go there for a lot of my reading. It's a big, big problem. So I wanted to get to them to say, let's get off your talking points for a moment. I mean, part of the thing that you should want as a leader is for your citizens to get a good sleep at night. You don't want people to be worried all the time. What were they going to do to alleviate the worry people had? And I didn't think I got a great answer on that. They went right back to talking points. But it was a great question.
Yeah. To credit where it's due, not a single candidate said my pillow was the answer to getting a better night's sleep. But,
although that might have got them a few campaign donations had they done that.
by the way, my pillow was a sponsor to this podcast, too. They're excellent pillows, everyone. Ignore me. Anyway, carry on.
Last question for you, Dana. You mentioned you love being deputy press secretary, and one of the people that you've made it very clear over the years that you admire most from all your time in professional life is Tony Snow, who was one of the press secretaries that you worked underneath. And sadly, his time at the podium was cut short due to his battle with cancer, and then we lost him. How do you think he would navigate and assess the political landscape and the way things are working in the press room right now?
He was a very optimistic person. And I think that he would he would rely on his knowledge and research of history to help understand the current moment. That's always a good reminder. Krauthammer used to do the same thing, right? You'd be so worried about the country's never been so divided. He's like, pick up a history book and read a little bit more about that and you'll feel better. Tony also had his priorities straight. He loved his family so much. And that was a good reminder for us. The other thing that he did is he really empowered me. And I've had so many people, and especially men in position of power over me that I worked for, that helped me along the way and said, you can do this. And on the day before he left the White House, I remember he came into my office. He said, how are you feeling? I was like, well, not so good. Because how am I supposed to fill your shoes? He was 6'5". I'm 5 feet tall. There was big shoes to fill. And also because he was a giant intellect, he was well loved in the briefing room and had an amazing way with words. But he had given me a lot of leeway. I was the one who briefed the president for those 2 years before I became the press secretary because Tony said, you do it better than me. I thought that was really interesting, right? Where he wasn't a boss hog. And when he came in and said, how are you doing? I said, I don't feel very good and I'm nervous. And he's made me stand up and he made me look him in the eye and he put his hands on my shoulders and he said, you are better at this than you think you are. About 2 weeks later, I was rushing to get to a briefing because I never, ever started a briefing late, ever. I would never do that because I thought that showed weakness. And also, you remember 43, he ran early, so I had to be ready for whatever was coming next. And anyway, I forgot my notes and I went to the briefing room without my notes. And I started to panic a little bit, going, oh, I don't have my binder. But I did the briefing and I was just myself. And I realized, oh, this is what Tony meant. I am better at this than I think I am. And that helped inform a lot of what I've done since through Minute Mentoring. And I wrote a book for young women called Everything Will Be Okay, Life Lessons from a Former Young Woman that I've used because that reaching out and down to help someone up makes my professional life really rewarding.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, Tony Snow is a beloved figure, and now you sit next to someone who's not nearly as tall as Tony Snow, but an equally good relationship, but probably in a different way in Greg Gutfeld, I would imagine.
Yeah, Greg Gutfeld, believe it or not, he's taller than me, but just by a smidge.
Dana, it's been a thrill to have you today, and it's very much an honor for both of us to have you as a regular listener to the Three Martini Lunch. And Jim, any last thoughts?
No, just thank you. It was great to be on your podcast. Thank you for returning the favor. And you absolutely belong in the illustrious Hall of Fame alongside Bob Costas, Joe Lieberman, and Governor Chris Sununu. And it'll be my guess that's our Mount Rushmore right now on the Three Martini Lunch podcast. We may someday have others, but based on, I think it's been like a year since we had Sununu, so there may never be another guest on this podcast again. You may have done it better than anybody else. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate what you do every single day. Thank you.
Our guest, as you know, has been Dana Perino, former White House press secretary in the administration of George W. Bush. She's also a co-host of The Five and of America's Newsroom, along with Bill Hemmer. He's Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for listening in today. Tomorrow we return to our regular format with just Jim and I talking through our three martinis. Hopefully we'll have a good one along the way. In the meantime, please subscribe to the podcast if you don't already, and tell your friends to do so as well. Also, thank you very much for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play Three Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm Dateline_DC, and Dana is at Dana Perino. Have a great Tuesday and join us again on Wednesday for the next Three Martini Lunch.